I want to go back for just a moment and reiterate again that race is biologically meaningless, but that doesn't mean it isn't real. So calling something a cultural construct serves to remind us that there's no biological basis for that categorization or for that idea. Okay, but that doesn't mean that it isn't real or that it's made up. Okay, race does have biological and definitely cultural consequences. So one classic example is that there are significant differences in disease and average lifespan between different racial groups in the U.S. So you see diabetes more often presenting among African American or Black racial categories in the U.S. than you do among white categories. Okay, so these differences can be attributed to a couple things, but partially racism and discrimination. Okay, you might think that this implies that there is a biological basis for race. Okay, and some people do take these differences of disease and lifespan to mean that there are different biological characteristics between white and Black racial groupings, for example. But really, you can attribute these differences to other cultural factors like racism and discrimination. Racism just being the repressive practices, structures, beliefs, and representations that uphold racial categories and social inequality. Okay, we all know what racism is. And then discrimination, these are the negative or unfair treatment of an individual because of his or her membership to a particular social group or category, or your interpretation of his or her membership in that category. Okay, so discrimination is broader than racism. Racism is discrimination based on race, and discrimination is much more broad as the unfair and negative treatment of an individual because of membership to any number of social categories or groups. Okay, so how is race then culturally constructed? We've already kind of talked about this, right? But the point is, even though they feel very real, they were learned at some point, right? There's classic examples and things about how babies don't see race. There's not racism among infants. That has to be taught or learned at some point as part of your enculturation, okay? And so a lot of times this is not intentional. Your parents most oftentimes are not telling you or trying to teach you very intentionally differences among the races. It's just part of your process of enculturation. It's a norm or value that you are taught at some point, not explicitly but implicitly instead. Okay, and so one primary way that race becomes culturally constructed or feeling so natural is through racialization. Okay, this is the social, economic, and political process of transforming populations into races and creating racial meanings. Okay, it's similar to naturalization, but more specific to race. In the U.S., let's take a look really quickly. In North America and in the European colonies in North America, people of African descent or Africans were not seen as racially inferior. Okay, but in the late 1600s, there was a class rebellion. So this was based on socioeconomic status, not on race. Okay, and this was pushed forward by poor workers or indentured servants, a lot of them being African. Okay, and so then leaders and people of political power, social power, began to divide people along color lines in terms and trying to control them and to keep rebellions under control. Okay, and to kind of displace the tension in a different way. And so then by the end of that century, we start to see the terms white and Black, symbolizing the differences between the two groups. And this changes the emphasis in the United States from demarcation between classes or economic status to demarcations of race or color.